Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. We're already running a couple minutes late, and my boss is not happy. I hope everyone had a great night last night. We all worked hard yesterday during the day. We had a lovely reception. We heard from some very inspiring young men. We saw a new book that was just released about stories of comebackers. We'll hear more about it later today from Dr. Matt Bergman. But right now, I am pleased and honored to introduce Dr. Aaron Thompson. He's the president of the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, and he's a passionate advocate for higher education and specifically for adult learners. As a first-generation college student from rural Clay County, Kentucky, Dr. Thompson experienced firsthand the transformative power of a college credential. And as president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, he works to ensure that all Kentuckians have an equal opportunity to improve their lives through post-secondary education. Before taking the helm at CPE, Dr. Thompson served as interim president of Kentucky State University, and he served in several other roles there. Dr. Thompson has written extensively on diversity, cultural competence, first-year experience programs, retention, student success, and a lot of other topics. He's a very sought-after national speaker. In 2019, he was inducted into the Kentucky Civil Rights Hall of Fame. Dr. Thompson received his doctoral degree in sociology from the University of Kentucky with an emphasis on organizational leadership, and I think it's paying off for Kentucky. It's my deep honor to welcome Dr. Thompson to this podium. Please help me.
Good morning. Good morning. Yeah, let's wake up. What a good-looking group of people. Welcome to the second day. How was yesterday? Good? You guys need to be lively. Maybe that's what's wrong. We're not getting enough adult learners back in the group because you guys aren't loud enough, right? How was yesterday? There you go. I'm quite sad that I didn't get a chance to be here. I was doing other stuff, but I am quite happy to be here this morning. I'm also quite happy to be a part of the conversation in Kentucky. Whether or not I'm president, it's kind of a little bit beside the point with this statement. Bottom line, we're not going to get where we need to go if we care about Kentucky unless we focus on this topic. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. The item that we know more than anything else, for us to get fifth from the bottom in poverty, we're going to have to get more people engaged in post-secondary education. Over the last year, I spent way over 12 months talking to over 3,000 people about why higher education matters. It was quite amazing to me to hear from all age groups that, in fact, they really didn't know. First of all, they didn't know how to afford to go to college in many cases. Second of all, they really didn't fully understand the value of college. And number three, they didn't think they could afford it. We're called, all of us who care about this conversation in Kentucky, to think about all the aspects that it's going to take to make it happen. Some of you know these numbers already, but for the last 12 years, we've been cut significantly in higher education. And we've had to depend on tuition, and we had to depend on students being on our campus and staying on our campus to make it happen. And we'll talk a little bit in a minute about the 60% by 30 goal that we have. And we're going to talk about why that is important, not only to educate our population, but to in fact increase the economic livelihood of Kentucky. And it's crucial to me that I lay out a set of priorities that I'll mention that tries to get us there. It's crucial to me that we're laser focused on getting ourselves there. And what I do know is that even though we're hoping, please, that we get money in higher education this year from the General Assembly, as the governor has proposed, and more, that we in fact still understand that that alone will not get us to where we need to go. We're going to have to get our campuses filled with students and students that will stay. There's only 4 ways that I know that's going to get us to where we need to go in that aspect. One is we've got to get a higher college going rate than the 51.7% of our graduating high school students that's moving forward. Number 2, we're going to have to increase our degree and credential output. In other words, we're going to have to raise those rates. We got to focus on student success heavily. Number 3, we got to get, these are not in order, but I'm saving the best for last just for you. Number 3, we have to get more out-of-state students that will come to the state and stay in the state. We need to increase that amount about 40%. And number 4, if we don't grab this 1.2 million adult learners to get them re-engaged or engaged in higher education, and I'll show you some startling data that my team put together that talks about that, then it's impossible, even if we did the first 3, to get us where we need to go. So this is truly about the moral obligation we have, at least the way I'm thinking about it, but moreover, it's about truly thinking about where Kentucky's going to be at in 10 years if we don't do something. So we are focused heavily on this, and I appreciate you being a part. I want to thank a few people. First of all, I want to thank my staff. You know, I see Randy back there who's been working really hard, right? I want to thank Heather, Melissa, Lee, all the people that kind of got us here that worked really hard, and they did work hard. I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, so I thank you all. Yeah, I thank the Graduate Network. I thank Lumina, who are good friends of mine, who cares about what we're trying to do in Kentucky and who's willing to back us. So this conversation is about adult learners, no doubt, but it's also about equity. It's also about economic development. It's also about workforce development. And you can't separate these things. If we leave anybody behind or don't engage all, we're not going to get anywhere close. So right now my staff is thinking, Melissa Young, who's my lead writer, is saying you need to probably get to a point where you're looking at the slides, and I will. But it's important for me to charge you at the end of this day that you go out and do something different than you did before, no matter how well you think you've been doing things. It's important that you have an obligation to think about success, not just for those adult learners, but for Kentucky and for your department or unit that you're a part of. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged. I am delighted to be the first speaker of the day. I'm also delighted to be the president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Not a lot of people know what that is, but I can just tell you we impact you if you're in Kentucky at all in higher education. We impact you every day, but only in good ways. We don't do anything bad, you know? And several years ago, we started focusing on this attainment process, knowing that there's a direct correlation between educational attainment, that's a post-secondary credential at any level or higher, to get us where we needed to go. Now, Lumina set this out, as you all know, years ago, that talked about 60% by 25. Well, not a lot of people are going to reach that, but we decided that we were going to put all effort in and give ourselves a strategic way of thinking about it, a realistic way of thinking about it. So we set the attainment goal, which we're talking about here in Kentucky, 25 to 64, 60% by 2030. And this is crucial to us, once again, as I said earlier, to think about exactly where Kentucky needs to go and how we're going to get there, and then what we're going to do when we get there. We're not going to rely on our laurels. I think I'll be here by 2030. What do you guys think? Yeah, maybe not, okay? I'm going to try to be somewhere. So let's consider the average age of the traditional college student. Many of us think about this, and we found this out on a listening tour. When people talk about college, they have this idea that they're talking about going to a four-year institution whereby they would have to be in a residence hall and do all that kind of stuff. Well, college in Kentucky is that post-secondary credential or higher at any level. And we've got to figure out exactly what we're talking about and what we're thinking about doing that, and we've got to sell it at this level. These dollars we got from Lumina is helping us to focus on how we get to adult learners to let them know how to come back. That doesn't fit into that rubric, but in fact, how they can come back in a way. I think I've got this, right? Yeah, thank you. See, you should have told me that. They never tell me anything. But how they can see themselves being engaged or re-engaged in higher education. If you look on this, what you'll find out is that this idea of the traditional age population group may not be exactly what the traditional used to be nationally. 40% are 25 or older, 49% are financially independent, 25% are parents. Let me be clear about that too. And this is especially true in Kentucky when I get to this slide in a second. What we know is that you may be under 25, but you may have all the aspects of an adult learner. You may have a child you're taking care of, a parent you're taking care of. You may have grandparents you're taking care of. There's all kinds of things that replicate that, so this number that we use, this age number, somewhat is artificial and spurious. That's what we use because it's a measurement tool, and I get it. But in fact, many of the students who fall under 25 will look a lot like an adult learner. 64% work while attending school. I'm a first-generation high school student. I had to work through college. And you can't tell now, but I used to be a heck of an athlete. Yeah. Okay, you guys got to wake up. I'm known to get people engaged, but not you all. Come on. But it was hard to play athletics because I wasn't that traditional age ideal. And many of our students are doing that now in high school and clearly college. 37% attend part-time. If you don't believe me, ask our KCTCS. The majority of their populations do. 36% experience food insecurity. And we found this out throughout Kentucky. We found even the homeless people that are trying to get to college to make a better way of life. So let's look at Kentucky. What we find out in Kentucky, we are on average a little bit younger, but that doesn't mean that we're less adult learner with that in mind. In 2019, we know that 34% of all post-secondary students in the state at the 2 and 4 year level were over the age of 25, while 18 to 24-year-olds still comprise the largest population. This enrollment, look at this figure, this enrollment is going down. Kentucky is having a depletion by numbers of that traditional age population group graduating from high school, and as I said a minute ago, depletion or going down of those that are attending college. And we're going to grab those too. But it is going down. The adult learner percent is going up. You also may be surprised that half of all degrees and credentials in 18 and 19 were awarded to students over the age of 25. Now, this is largely due to KCTCS doing an excellent job. All my KCTCS people out there, I love you. But you all responded to Kentucky. You looked at what was needed to be done to get more of these people back engaged in a short-term credential or other credentials that help them get in the workforce. We started out this conversation a little about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, where we had over 200,000 middle-skilled jobs that needed to be filled. KCTCS stepped up to the plate, and we got that down to 16,000. Still got a long way to go. But let me be clear, we can't get there just on short-term credentials. We have to get more baccalaureate degrees and other degrees to really get where we need to go. So we have this attainment goal that I mentioned a few minutes ago. And somehow we've got to figure out how to think about this once again to the economic value of Kentucky. And what I do know, since the Great Recession, nearly all the jobs created required that you have some post-secondary education. The high-paying jobs, whether they're in manufacturing or not, are moving overseas. So the high school diploma alone cannot get you or Kentucky where it needs to go. And as you all know, by 2030, probably most of the jobs that will exist will be jobs not yet created. So we've got to also include all these employability outcomes that are needed, those skills people call soft, I call essential, to be a part of not only the baccalaureate degrees, but also our associate degrees, whether they're in technical or transfer or even in the short-term degree. You're going to have to be able to communicate and work with people that are different than you. So these are all things that we have to include as we think about moving forward. With just over 10 years left in 2030, we are on track, and I appreciate you getting us there. It wasn't that long ago, if you look at us there in 2000, look where we were at. 2015, we were at 45%. And it's going to take about 1.7 percentage points increase per year to get us to that 60% mark. I'm happy to say that in the last 2 years, this is an academic phrase, by the way, you'll get this, we've been kicking butt. Last year was 4 percentage points. And once again, I appreciate all those who are here that have concentrated on that, because as money went down, our degrees output went up, and there's no direct correlation there, I will tell you. It just means that we had to raise tuition, which now we are concerned about the affordability issue to make money happen, and we had to change our items around, cut to the bone, shift our dollars in a way that we focus on those outputs that are good to Kentucky and good for Kentucky. There's some demographic changes ahead, though, and I want to be real. As you may not be able to tell, I'm an African-American guy from eastern Kentucky. I'm a hill guy. I'm proud to be from the country. We've seen ourselves as a mainly white population, and indeed we are, but guess what? Nationally it's changing, and Kentucky is changing. So we cannot use the same methodology we did 2 years ago, Jenny Sawyer, right? Jenny's at Louisville, a good friend of mine. I'll just call her out. When we're out recruiting people, we're going to have to think about all the folk that didn't look like that population we recruited ages ago. And I used to be the head of enrollment management at a campus a couple, 2 or 3 decades ago. And I will tell you how we did business then, if we're still doing it that way now, we cannot continue to do it. But Kentucky is not the only state that is looking to be progressive. So for us in Kentucky, I like being number one. If we're going to be progressive, let's be really, really aggressive with that progressive behavior, right? And obviously, you know about the low birth rates that's happened since the Great Recession. This will matter too, but those population groups that are increasing are those increasing that are of color in many ways. Many are low income, first generation. Many will experience the immigrant experience on the campus. And if we somehow disenfranchise those at the quote unquote traditional age, once again, we'll have another uphill battle to go trying to get them back engaged as an adult learner. So for us to reach our attainment goal, we've set a set of what we call items that will give us a direction on how we need to go. Once again, I'm going to give props to my data and analytics team who put together this very, you need to follow when we get here, this very complicated set of slides, but you guys are smarter than I am, so you'll get it. So we're going to have to concentrate on items like our college going rate, our retention rate, and our graduation rate. So this team ran a set of scenarios, whereas we're looking at this starting at where our baseline is now, which is 45.5%. So let's say that we're able to raise Kentucky college going rate, and let's say we do everything we need to do to get it way beyond this 51.7% that we have. So if you look at that, that's only going to raise the attainment goal by a short amount, from 45% to 48%. If you throw in retention for the traditional age cohort, by the way, wouldn't you love at the federal government we changed the way we measure graduation rates and retention rates to really include those things that we really look at, like transfer students, part-time students, and so on, but we don't have that yet. We're working on it. So let's say we increase our retention rates from 75 to 80% at our four-year institutions and from 50 to 60% at our KCTCS institution. We would still only move 1 percentage point in this attainment goal. You remember my big 4 points earlier, right? How we need to get where we need to go. What about if we increase our graduation rate? If we moved graduation rates in Kentucky from 54 to 60% at our universities and from 31 to 40% at KCTCS, by the way, these are monumental movements, if you don't know. We would still only get to 50%. So what's the last one you remember? Last but not least? So we figured out that a much easier route to get where we need to go is to engage this 1.2 million people I mentioned earlier. Those that may have no college or some college credit. We can't get, if we do this, we get to our 60% goal. Some of you know that I'm a statistician by trade and I live on data and analytics. Well, we just can't say, and we talk about we're data driven all the time. We have to be data driven, but we have to put strategies and continuous improvement around these analytics to get where we need to go. So we know for a fact that we have no choice but to be deeply engaged in re-engaging and engaging this population group. We also have to get serious about addressing the educational inequities, because the population, as I said earlier, is becoming more diverse. By 2060, the number of multiracial Americans is expected to triple. In Kentucky, minorities comprise about 10% of our population back in 2000, but 20 years later, we're 15% of color. So this graph shows the percentage of Kentucky adults with at least an associate degree by race and ethnicity. The gap between white and Latinx Kentuckians is 8.1%. The gap between white and black Kentuckians is 8.8%. We have no choice but to work with P12 True Enough to close these gaps, because the latest data are showing that they're expanding. We have to do a better job in Kentucky and our post-secondary institutions to focus on this gap. Now, I'm proud to say we're going to not rely on our laurels. As some of you know, I believe if we're going to do it in Kentucky, let's be the state that does it better and first. Kentucky, in the last 5 years, we increased our credential attainment by 11%, even with the downturn of the economy in the past and with no money coming to higher ed. I'm proud to say with our underrepresented minorities, that was 27%. a huge gap closing in Kentucky for post-secondary. If you include low income with students of color, it was 23%. But our adult population, we have fallen. That's a gap also. And not only is it an achievement gap in many cases when we get them, it's also an opportunity gap that we have to focus on. So when I took over this job, I knew that we were going to have to get to a point of where we focused ourselves, as I mentioned earlier. So we took a very good strategic agenda that had a lot of input from across the state, from everybody, that I still am proud of that agenda, but we took it and boiled it down to 4 points that we were going to ask all of our campuses to focus on with their strategic plans. And these 4 priorities are, as you probably already heard about them enough, we know that higher education matters. How many of you have your button on? If you don't have your button on, I think somehow you need to leave the room now. No, you don't. You just need to get one later if you don't have it on. Higher education matters. We've had too many people that did not understand this value proposition. Yes, it matters because it increases your income. We'll talk about that in a second. But it also matters that 90% of those folks that are on Medicaid and SNAP don't have any post-secondary credentials at all. Now keep on going with this. Higher education matters. So for all those that argue that higher education doesn't matter or that not everybody needs college, well, I'm going to tell you right now, our data just doesn't say that. It says everybody needs college. May not be a 4-year degree, but they need college. So it's up to you to sell this, not just me. And higher education matters at a lot of levels. Some people know I work a lot with students, first-year students especially, and that's adult learners and not, as well as traditional age population groups. So when they come in, we know that as quickly as you can talk to them when they come in your doors about why higher education matters, the greater likelihood that they have of staying with you. But you have to really focus on them. How many of you know when you talk to an adult learner, by telling them it matters to their kids probably more than it matters to them, that increases their emotional integrity toward getting that credential? How many of you knew that? Now you do if you didn't. So we have to really talk about not just the economic output for them, but the intergenerational and the multi-generational outputs that it has. So how we're going to focus on this is obviously with some of the things we talked about. We're going to drive the message. And I appreciate Gabrielle. Where's Gabrielle at? Gabrielle, if you see all these wonderful infographics coming out from me, it is me, not her. No, it's from her. But she's working with David Mahan and the team to put these out. We're going to drive it in talking about these are the things we're going to have to do to get where we need to go. And so David, I appreciate his shop. They did this return on investment report, whereas we followed over 43,000 students who graduated from high school in 2010 for the next 8 years to find out what happened to those students and what kind of return on investment higher education was for them, or if they didn't go, and many didn't go, about 32% didn't go to college at all, what were the impacts they had on not only their lives, but also the lives of the other people in the state, because they are tax-paying people. And this is some of the things. It's a big report. I hope you go and get it. I don't have time to talk about it today. But we found out about, in many cases, they didn't come close to paying what the cost or the sticker price of higher education was. For an example, if you got an associate degree, you paid a significant amount less, about $30,000 actually for that associate degree, than what the sticker price said, which was significantly more. And you paid about $55,000 for the baccalaureate degree. We are a high-age state, and we need to leverage that in the message that we give our students to come back. We saw that just a few years out, college graduates were making $8,000 to $12,000 more per year than high school graduates. Just a few years out. We only had an 8-year window here. And we know that projections out, that person with a baccalaureate degree will make about $1.2 million more than that high school degree holder. An associate degree earner will make about $422,000 more. Now, these are real data in Kentucky. This is not just coming out of the Georgetown study in D.C. These are us. But we also have to recruit influencers, and that's what we're doing with this grant we got from Lumina. Once again, I really appreciate those that are here with us, having this conversation with us. And I want to just call out a couple of folk that we're working with, a couple of campuses, like Hazard, Jefferson, and Madisonville Community Colleges. Where are you? Yeah. So this Adult Promise Grant we received from Lumina, we are working with these folks to really implement an ambassador program. And this ambassador program literally goes out in partnership with the Graduate Network to talk about how we recruit these adult learners to come back to us. And we are talking to a variety of folks to be our ambassadors. We're talking to employers, we're talking to governmental officials, we're talking to them, we're giving them lapel pins. We'll do anything that will take to help them, to help us spread the word about adult recruitment. Now let's move on to the second priority. We've got to make it more affordable. People say all the time we're a high-aid state, and the return on investment report saying it's a good deal that you make, but I promise you, there are many of our students, even though they may be able to get a lot of aid, they're not getting enough to live on every day or support their families or do a variety of other things. We've got to make college more affordable. I'm happy to say my first full year in this job, we raised tuition only about 2.2%, which was the lowest in the last couple of decades. But as campuses are getting more cuts, that's tough to maintain. They've got to get money somehow. And we've only been, in the last 10 years, allowing them to raise tuition to a point where they're covering just 60% of their cost. This is not really investment. So, but we can no longer look to cut to the bone, or we're no longer able to raise tuition at such a large amount that we are not letting students become a part of us, and we still say that we have an open access system for many of them. We don't if they can't or feel like they can't afford to go. So we are going to do several things that may have an effect on adult learners. We're going to examine our online pricing to make sure that it's friendly to adults and targeted to certain adults, whether they are returning workers or employers are paying for them to go, or whether they are many of the adult ed people that still don't have a GED that needs to move on to college. We've got to be more focused on what we're doing in this particular area. We cannot price people out of having easy access to education. We've got to increase aid to adult learners. We have to be focused there. We're increasing aid to our low-income folks and other folk that we want to be re-engaged in higher education and stay engaged. This is an area where we have to go also. We need to consider some debt forgiveness programs. When I was at Kentucky State, we did a few of that. And by the way, we're not talking about a lot of money. And if you get them to stay in, or if you get them to come back because somehow they had a $2,000 bill they didn't pay for 15 years ago and can't get re-engaged, then that barrier is silly. We've got to figure out how to think about this. But we also are going to have to maximize what we do with our employers. And let me tell you, our veterans and our military people are low-hanging fruit. We've got, when I say military friendly, I'm not talking about just saying that we're open to all people who served in the military because we appreciate your service. I'm saying let's put our money where our mouths are. Let's open our doors. And we've got to, and we've started this in Kentucky, and I'm happy to say so, that we've got to do a better job of getting employers engaged with us on the front end and not the back end of this conversation. And that means that we may have to work with them to develop competency-based programming as well as other items that helps us to get back to where we need to go. And we know that you heard yesterday from Ivy Tech and Wayne State how they're doing some of their debt forgiveness programs, and how they are even giving students some money back to be successful. The third priority is on student success. This is the equity priority. We have to really be able to use our demographics, our knowledge to focus on just not the achievement gaps, but the opportunity gaps. What are we providing based on a traditional age method of doing business? And how many people are we leaving out because of that? We have too many first-generation students of color that we're disenfranchising when they come to our campus. If we get them to our campuses, we haven't changed our pedagogical processes. We haven't done a lot of the things that we need to do to make them feel included. And the analogy that I give fairly often, because people get all these words mixed up, so I'm going to give you an analogy so you'll know exactly what they are. Diversity is an aspect of the population. It talks about the demographics of that person in many cases. Cultural competence is really a measurement. It talks about how well you are able to, in fact, use diversity to the benefit of that student and the campus. It's a measurement process, just like writing competencies and reading competencies. And in Kentucky, I'm happy to say our diversity policy is focused heavily on making sure that all of our campuses are able to measure cultural competence. But also think of it this way, as a dance. Diversity means that you invite a variety of people based on their demographics and social ideologies to come to the dance. Inclusion is you ask them all to dance. Equity is you teach them all to dance. Not everybody can be as good of a dancer as I am. I'm an athlete and a great dancer. But the idea that we have to understand what we're doing with all those categories to get where we need to go. We've heard from Complete College America, the Lumina Foundation, and all of those others that's concentrating on adult learners, and adults need accelerated terms, year-round, evenings, weekends, a variety of ways that we can get them engaged online, whatever it takes. So we're going to have to get out of the silos we've created in this area. Advising and mentoring are especially important. We know that if you're traditional or quote-unquote a returning student, mentoring actually has a huge effect on the lives of all of these students. And many of you have had a mentor. So how do we get to a point where we become a mentor, not just to do our job, but how are we connecting with one or two people that helps us to get where we need to go? The last priority I'll talk about concerns academic quality. We fairly often say, well, I know what we're giving really has all the pieces that we need to have. That in fact, we are doing critical thinking. We're doing problem solving. We're doing all of those other items that we argue that we are. But unless we're able to measure those and show those, then it's kind of hard to say we have quality. Quality can be measured. Don't let people say it can't be. So a good way that we need to think about this, obviously, goes to making sure that our programs are full of what we call those essential outcomes that are crucial to where we need to go, that we have programs that align with the needs of adult learners, that they are connected with good student support services and advising, and so on. You know, Project Graduate is what we have at CPE, and I'm happy to say you all have opened your doors to many of these returning students with hours that they didn't know how to use to get a certificate or a degree, and we've right now reached over 3,000 of those students, and we will continue to push that and push it harder even. We also have 15 campuses working with the Institute for Higher Education Policies on Degrees When Due, which focuses on proven strategies and best practices for adult re-engagement and completion. We are also encouraging institutions to develop clear degree pathways. What we know is that many people like to know what they do next. We just assume that they have those sorts of knowledge bases to be independent and we can just roll with the flow. They're adults, they know how to choose. Well, no, I mean, if you're like me, when I go to a menu in a restaurant, give me about 6 items and I'll always choose one that I like. Give me 100 items and whatever I choose will not be as good as what you have across the table. We've got to focus on how we are connecting their backgrounds, their courses, with the direction for an output. We also need to develop more relationships and partnerships with employers like Trilogy Healthcare and East and Westbrook Construction, who you'll be hearing from later on today, and we appreciate them being here. So in closing, and I have time because we started late, I told my staff, don't you tell me to get off because, at the time and cut my time short. So whoever's coming up after me, Dan, sorry. I want to talk about our commitment to you and to what we're doing. These are just not words, and for those who know me and know my staff, I'm not very good at saying stuff that I don't back up. So this is about you making a commitment to making this happen too. This is about us doing this in partnerships. This is about no excuses, maybe some reasons we can't do certain things, but no excuses ever. This is about talking about what we can do versus what we can't do. I'd rather be in a system where we just are assuming people are opting out versus we're trying to automatically get them to opt in. I'd rather weed in than to weed out. So how are we doing what we're doing on our campuses to holistically look at driving these things that we find to be important? With that in mind, for the next few minutes, I'm going to take a couple of questions. If I don't have the answers, I will lie to you. No, I won't. But I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
So you mentioned briefly performance metrics. Is the CPE considering some performance metrics that would give institutions credits for successfully moving part-time students through the pipeline?
We're in the process now. We come back, some of you know we have the performance funding model that we implement. It was designed by the legislature with the presidents at the table, and I was one of the people at the table at the time. But we're going to be bringing folk back in July. What I plan on putting as a discussion item, I can't tell you what they'll decide to do. I plan on putting as a discussion item those pockets that we haven't been able to move to get us where we need to go. As you can tell, I set these slides up with that in mind. We've got to focus on those things that matter. Part-time, we are looking at, I'm looking at Lee and David, we're looking at a way we can start measuring completion rates that includes all those versus those standardized iPad graduation rates that just makes me mad, right? We've got to look at population groups. This time we are happy to say, because if you noticed some driving elements, we didn't get this gap closing by not being conscious of what we were doing, right? They're in the performance funding model, folk, as well as the diversity policy. So if we're going to drive what we need to drive, we need to be thinking about where we haven't driven as much as the old roads we plowed. Now, I'm not saying we still shouldn't go on those old roads, but I'm saying we may want to explore new places with it. So the answer is, you know I'm going to be talking about. Yes. Other questions? If I was down there, I could get my steps in, couldn't I?
With things like performance funding on the horizon, is there anyone in that work group that is going to take into account more holistic individual college situations? For instance, we're on a border with Tennessee, our college. Many of our students transfer or even transfer before they graduate or after they graduate with us with non-Kentucky schools. Also, we have a large student population that is on a military base, so they're very transient, and they may only be coming to us to get one class for promotion, or all of those things, of course, affect our performance base and make it look like we're not as great as we really are. Awesome. So is that, are those conversations happening in those conversations that are regarding performance-based funding?
Well, we start to officially come back with the performance-based funding conversations in this July because that's what the law says. But the answer is yes. Let me tell you what we've done so far this year. For an example, we used to have our out-of-state tuition rate at two times the amount of in-state, or 2.5 times. We just reduced that to 1.3 times. And that, in fact, if you wanted to concentrate on specific people like military, you just have to write an MOA with us, and I'll give you that opportunity to go lower if you want. So this is on your back, right? We cut down those barriers to get you there. Now, how are you going to get yourselves there? That's one thing. The performance-based funding is that we do have it included that any student, doesn't matter, as long as you get them a credential or degree or hours. Right now we're measuring it in those 30-hour terms, but we also are measuring student credit hours to a degree. You're getting some funding for that. My point being is that what you have to do is open yourselves up enough and take enough risk to get them in your walls. You'll get the response that you need from that. But you'll also get, I mentioned, tuition dollars. So we have cut this year those barriers for you to reach out and do that and be okay with it. One more question, they told me. Yes.
This is more of a comment on that second bullet point, but this really hits home for my family, my husband's family. He's a first-generation student and the only one of his siblings to go to college, and I've talked extensively with them. They all work in kind of trades and things like that. I've tried to pitch the Work Ready Scholarship to them, and none of them are interested in going to college. None of them really think they need it at all. And I've tried to talk to them about it and try to change their mind. And I think that might be a potential obstacle for just some very stubborn adults who think they don't need it. They've got a job, they make plenty of money, what they think anyway. But I don't really have a question. This is more of just an observation that I've made in my family. They're down in Monroe County, and they just are happy with where they are. And I don't know how we could change their minds, basically.
You know, of course I got a comment to your non-question, but this is what I know. You should get the return on investment report to show them exactly, let them see real numbers. The second thing you can tell them is, guess who lost their jobs with the Great Recession? And we can't forever keep at this economic movement system that we have now, right? It's just going to change. And the people that lost their jobs were those people that thought they would never lose their jobs. That's because they didn't have any sort of post-secondary education that their employers felt they could be retrained to get. So bottom line, we have data that can help you. And David Mahan, where are you? Raise your hand. He knows everything. You talk to him, he'll give you what you need to get you there.